think we're witnessing the fall of the American economy and how this ties in with biblical prophecy.
Well, I got started on this study right at the time when all of the Bernard Madoff stuff was in the news, and somebody handed me a book. I'll never forget the title of the book, John. It was called Madoff with the Money. And I realized that that was about as clean a title as you could get for what he had done. He actually extorted $65 billion from famous people like Zsa Gabor and Larry King and Sandy Koufax. Even took $3 million from his own sister. And what he did was he just used the Ponzi scheme to make himself wealthy. He took money, told them he was investing it, and he was not investing it at all. He was just pouring it into his own account. And when I realized that he had taken control of all this money and he had used it for his own purposes, I realized that he was an example of what was going on in our own country. The Ponzi scheme that he perpetuated will probably be the record keeper, but it's not anything like what's happened in America.
Tell us about Charles Ponzi.
Well, he's the person who, years before that, was promising people 90% return on their money. He was telling them that if they would give him money, he would turn it around. And what he would do is he would take the money of investors and he would fund the new money into paying the old investors. So as long as he kept money flowing in, he was okay. But when the money started to slow down and these people wanted their returns, it collapsed and he was expelled from the United States and he ended his life in prison.
And then you say, hey, that's what the government's doing. And you start off with Social Security as an example. Now, how do you link those two together?
Well, when I began to study this, I don't consider myself an economist, so I read every book I could find on the economy. And one of my first surprises was the background story of Social Security, which we hear so much about in our news today. First of all, I was surprised at how young that system is, 1935 under Roosevelt. And, the start of Social Security, John, was really a noble effort on the part of our country to try to provide some sort of retirement for people when they get past 65. But like anything else we seem to do, it wasn't around very long before they started adding things to it. Social Security no longer was anything close to a retirement program. And all of these other entitlement programs were married to Social Security until there was no possible way for it to be funded.
Yeah, you said in 2008, Social Security and Medicare obligations had become $1 trillion, or 1/3 of the federal budget.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people early on thought Social Security was a private fund, that the money was put into a lockbox someplace and it was there and it was safe. But what we know is that didn't happen. It was just funneled into the general fund, so to speak, and that money was being spent for other things. So here we are right now getting ready to go into 2012, and the perfect storm is about to happen.
You got 80 million American baby boomers that are coming in 2012, all right? And they're expecting, and some of you folks that are watching, you're expecting that you paid in all of these years, that when you finally get to that spot, you're going to want your Social Security check, and you're going to want Medicare benefits, and you're going to stop working and paying into the system. And so the fact is, all of a sudden, you have no money coming in, and you got all these people drawing on that, and the fact is there's no money in the till.
No, that's right. And it's getting worse because now we've added all of the Medicare systems to it. We're getting ready to add all of the healthcare system, which we're not sure where that is right now or what's going to happen with the new Congress. But John, what's happening, we're digging a hole that is so deep under any kind of rationale. How do we get out of it? How do we dig ourselves out?
Yeah, I thought the facts you put, the current unfunded liability for Social Security is 17.5, not million, not billion, $17.5 trillion that should be there. It's not there. Where are we going to get this money?
And that's part of the problem. We talked this last year about how now our government has a debt of $14 trillion, and that's staggering. Unfortunately, that's not the whole truth, right? I remember, I think in the book there's a picture of an iceberg, and the iceberg shows the visible debt of 14 or 12 or whatever it is now, and then underneath that are all of the invisible entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and the three systems of Medicare. and it totals up to somewhere in the neighborhood of $120 trillion.
In fact, David, let's talk about the three parts of Medicare that are unfunded and are coming up. They're due, and there's no money there.
Well, when I started to dig into this, I knew about Medicare. I guess I didn't realize it was broken down into three categories. The first is Part A, which takes care of hospital visits, and that's $36.7 trillion.
Unbelievable.
The second part, Part B, is for doctors, and that's $37 trillion. And then you have to add to that the part that was voted in during George W. Bush's rule, and that is for prescriptions, and that's $15.6 trillion.
Yeah, if you add all of those up, you get to $89.3 trillion that's unfunded. Where's that money going to come from?
Well, John, I think that's the question that nobody knows the answer to. We don't have the ability to tax our way out of it. We can't work our way out of it. We can't grow our way out of it. So we try to borrow our way out of it. And we're just somebody said if you know you're digging a hole in the wrong place, the first thing you should stop doing is stop digging. And we just keep digging, and there seems to be no end to it.
Yeah, let's add the other parts to this. If you add the unfunded liability of Social Security to it, then you're up to $106.8 trillion. And you add that to the national debt, which they are talking about, is $14 trillion. The total unfunded liability, as you said, is $120.8 trillion. We only brought in like 2009, $900 billion. So we were close to $1 trillion in terms of coming in. You got $1 trillion that's coming in over here, and you owe $120 trillion over here, and it's still growing.
And that amounts to a debt load that's easy to see when you say it's $383,000 per person, per citizen in the United States. And if you happen to be a family of four, it's $1.5 million for that group. And that's staggering.
Let's take another category, David. We have to talk about the cost of national defense. You have found out some staggering information. Tell us about it.
Well, you almost feel guilty even bringing this up, because if you're a patriot, and I am, you stand for a strong country. I want a strong military. We all do. But here is the number that I found that just really I couldn't believe. 41% of all of the money spent in the entire world on the military is spent by the United States. We spend more money on our military than China, than Russia, Europe, and several other nations combined.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. What actually are the numbers that we're spending?
Well, in 2009, our defense budget was $642 billion, second only to Social Security, which is $677 billion. And those two items together account for roughly 2/3 of the American budget. So if you put Social Security and the military together, you've spent 2/3 of all the money we have in our budget.
Yeah, our friend Joe Beltz, editor of World Magazine, put this into focus for us. Tell us what he said.
Well, John, one of the real problems when you deal with this kind of money is to try to figure out how to get it into a package that you can comprehend. And he did this for me. He said that to fund one soldier for a year in Iraq or Afghanistan, it costs $1 million. $1 million per soldier per year to fight the war we're fighting. That's mind-boggling.
David, one of the things that you said, which was really eye-opening, is how much money, how much we're paying to service the debt that we already have. Just the interest, not to pay it down, just to keep it going. Talk about those numbers.
Oh, in 2009, it cost the government $202 billion to service our debt. That's just not paying any principal, just paying the interest on it. And the White House estimates that by 2019, it will cost $700 billion in interest payments alone on our $12 trillion we have in debt.
Yeah, and we've already raised it up to $14 trillion. We're adding like $2 or $3 trillion each year with our eyes open to this debt that we have. And if you take their numbers, if by 2019 we're paying $700 billion in interest just to pay the service the debt of interest alone, not paying anything down, and you're only bringing in $900 billion, it means you got $200 billion left for the military, for Social Security, for running the country, for doing everything else. You can't do that.
No. And you know, one of the hardest things about writing this book, John, was that every time we would finish it, within a few days, the debt would go up. And we had to keep recalibrating all of this. And so even though this is a very recent book, some of it's out of date already because we have spent money in the last 2 years like we have never spent money in the history of our country.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, there's something else that was really bothersome to me when I read it, and that is who we are borrowing the money from and how much money we owe different nations in the world, some that we have never borrowed money from before. Folks, stick with us. We're going to be back in just a moment here, and you won't believe this information.